when it comes to managing business development, understanding what's going on at the account level, understanding what's going on at the individual stakeholder level, and then figuring out a way for you to add as much value as possible throughout the full buyer's journey for those really important stakeholders. So understanding what their biggest goals and challenges are and providing phenomenal educational resources and events experience so that they want to spend time with members of your team throughout their research, comparing options and decision-making process. Hello, data center friends all over the planet. It is Joshua Feinberg, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show. And I'm thrilled to have you joining us today, where I'll be answering a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from data center operators, technology and facilities companies, construction and real estate companies that sell to or partner with data center operators. And regardless of whether you are in a sales, marketing, account management, product, channel partnerships, or executive sponsor role, if you are serious about elevating your role, your team's impact, and your company's growth path within the data center ecosystem, you are for sure in the right place to make sure that you get notified about upcoming live streams and webinars like this, as well as related educational resources. Make sure that you subscribe to our data center sales and marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can subscribe directly on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. So what's on the agenda for today? I'm going to be tackling 6 of these big sales and marketing challenges, including how to grow sales of data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data center security, as well as connectivity. Next, I'll look at how to manage business development for cloud migration, manage cloud services, and disaster recovery. After that, we'll turn our attention to how a data center operator can improve their messaging. Following that, we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor, and then we'll look at how to generate new IT infrastructure leads for colocation, connectivity, and DR, disaster recovery. After that, we'll talk about how to connect with data center architects and engineers for pre-engineered metal building systems. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, we'll look at how to compete with data center real estate brokers. So first up, how to grow sales of data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, and connectivity. That's a fantastic question. So we first need to know how big or how small your company is. We also need to know how big or how small your clients are. Why is that an issue? Because when it comes to areas as potentially diverse, but could be overlapping in product lines between data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, and connectivity, are these 4 separate lines of business that need to have 4 separate sales teams, 4 separate sales and marketing playbooks? Or do you have one set of potentially sales development reps and account executives that are selling all 4 of these lines of business to the same client base, to the same target accounts, to the same total addressable market? We're going to simplify things here and say that you've done a reasonably good job of integrating all 4 of these lines of business: infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, and connectivity, and you're selling all 4 of these products and services to the same client base. So in order to grow sales, we need to make sure that we have a really good handle on who exactly these clients are. And to do that, we want to first look at where your company is most successful. Where do you have the happiest clients? Where are they most satisfied objectively when you do your NPS, Net Promoter Score kinds of surveys, and you look at your reviews, your testimonials, and your case studies? And when you look at all of these leading indicators together, what kind of pattern recognition do you see? In some cases, you may want to dig into your CRM, your customer relationship management system, and see What do these companies have in common at the account level? Where are they located geographically? Are they all tightly clustered together in a certain metro area? Are they spread out throughout an entire country? Are they spread out through several countries, throughout a full continent, or globally? So let's first get some clarity before we worry about growing sales on your ideal client profile. And the first place to start is we need to know geographically where you're in the best position to market, sell, and service these clients. Because, especially when it comes to the intersection of infrastructure and security, actually hybrid cloud and connectivity as well, there are for sure compliance and certification related issues that come up that are unique to certain geographical regions. So let's first get clarity on within your ideal client profile where these clients are going to be located. Second, let's also get crystal clear on what size they are. And the first instinct a lot of times for data center operators is to think in terms of square footage, square meters, kilowatts, megawatts. The reality, though, is when it comes to growing sales, a sales and marketing playbook, a GTM, go-to-market playbook, what we really need is we really need to normalize. We need to standardize based on number of employees at these accounts. Why is that so important? Well, the gold standard for databases for prospecting and growing sales is LinkedIn. 10 years ago, there may have been a little bit of debate, but now with over 1 billion active users worldwide, LinkedIn has won hands down as the standard like that. So, and LinkedIn has also been remarkably stable in the size bands that it's used over the years for how to categorize different size companies. So this is almost like a Goldilocks question. What is not too big, but not too small, to be able to fit within your ideal client profile? In other words, when it comes to your 4 lines of business, data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, and connectivity, what kinds of companies are so small that they can't afford your minimums? That's the bottom end of the range, the minimum number of employees. The maximum number of employees at the upper end of the range is what kinds of companies are so large that their requirements for what they'd be looking for your company, you just may not be able to deliver successfully, either because the technical, the compliance, the legal requirements, the financial requirements, whatever it is, are just prohibitive for your company to meet. Or perhaps they would deal with a completely different kind of provider or do certain elements of this in-house, or a little bit of all of the above. But I want you to get clarity when it comes to growing sales around the size range of what's a good fit for you. For a lot of companies that would offer those kinds of services, maybe it's a minimum of 50 employees and a maximum of 5,000 employees. Again, your mileage will vary depending on your capabilities, your team size, the compliance certifications, the geographic regions where you locate, team financial capabilities, a host of different issues. Then we also should get really clear about where we're trying to grow sales in terms of the nature of your clients' businesses, what industry they're located in, their business models. That's especially relevant because, again, going back to what I just mentioned a few moments ago about geography, certifications, and compliance tends to be anchored to the intersection of a geographic region and an industry, especially like if you sell into healthcare or financial services or government or education or something like that. There are for sure issues that come up that may qualify or disqualify your company from being a good fit for growing sales in those areas. So we need clarity on your ideal client profile. Geography, company size, and industry are really good starting point for that. Then within these accounts, as long as you're seeing strong enough pattern recognition, let's get crystal clear about who the most important stakeholders are in these accounts that we need to build relationships with to grow sales. And the way, once we have an account, once we have our ideal client profile, you can go ahead and build out a target account list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand companies that would fit perfectly in that ideal client profile, or defining your addressable market. But it still comes down to building relationships with people within these accounts, the people we need to educate and build trust with. And the way we're going to define those, we're going to call those buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client based on actual research and some select educated speculation. When we do the actual research, we need to find the consensus among that particular segment's biggest goals and their biggest challenges, what they're trying to achieve individually, what their team is working on, what their company is working on, and what's driving them nuts, what's stressing them out, what's causing them to have to pull all-nighters, what's threatening their job security, what's ruining their time off when they're with their friends, family, and loved one, where a vacation turns into the opposite of a vacation. So taking all of that into account in their own words, and the way we're going to get their own words is we actually need to do real research. We also need to know the consensus on like basic demographics, the job titles, skills endorsements, especially with LinkedIn, certifications, where they hang out online and offline, who they're influenced by, and most of all, what causes someone like that to prioritize the kinds of initiatives that you're talking about that would be leading to a major purchase decision around data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, or connectivity. So once we have that in mind, the most important kind of stakeholder we'll designate as the primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of stakeholder that we need to build relationships with in these kinds of companies, we're going to call a secondary buyer persona. In some cases, there could even be a tertiary buyer persona, the third most important. We know decision by committee is now pretty much what you're going to see across the board on most major purchase decisions. There's a lot of stakeholders involved. The decision committees are getting even bigger. So we need to really understand who is on these committees and what do they care about. Because our entire strategy for getting in early and getting in often and earning the mind share of the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all in the right context, so they see you and your team as the go-to experts in the space, we need to be really, really clear about what their top priorities are and how you and your client-facing team fit into that. And then once you have strong consensus on that, that will help you define what you want to be talking about, what you want to be talking about in your educational resources, what you want to be talking about at your educational events. And let's put all this together with the idea that in most cases, buyers of infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, and connectivity are now like most buyers in the data center industry in that they want a self-propelled buyer's journey. They're just doing tons of research before they're open to having a conversation with someone from your sales team. It used to be 10 years ago that people in that kind of buying motion would spend about half of their buyer's journey, about half of the sales cycle with someone from your sales team. Those days are long gone. Add in 10 years of digital transformation, baby boomers retiring, Gen Z and millennials getting into more decision-making kinds of roles, Gen X getting elevated more into C-suite, a couple of years of millions of people working from home at the beginning of the 2020s. And all of this has led us to the point now where Gartner found 83% of a typical buyer's journey is now over before vendor contact, before sales contact, 83%. So best case scenario, your sales team that used to have the luxury of being in about half of the time, getting invited into their side of the table about half of the time, is now completely marginalized. Most of your prospects are more sales allergic than they've ever been. And you're lucky if you get to spend 17% of the buyer's journey with them, if you keep doing things the way you've always been doing them. But there's a silver lining with all of this. Your direct competitors, your indirect competitors, your non-business competitors, non-business model competitors that are clinging to an outdated playbook are going to continue to be squeezed, commoditized, and marginalized in this whole process. But your opportunity is to turn that all on its head and to think about repositioning, repackaging, and showing up in a completely different way than you have in the past. This is like looking at your sales development reps, your account executives, your marketers, your account managers, your product managers, your channel partnership managers, and figuring out a way for them to show up early as educators, as consultants, as teachers, as trusted advisors, and some of them even rising all the way up to the level of being seen as thought leaders. Am I telling you that you should immediately go in and come up with better synonyms for job title that go in an email signature or on a LinkedIn profile or on a business card? Perhaps, but this is more a company culture mandate that needs to start at the top, at the C-suite in most companies like yours, because this is a really, really big cultural change for so many companies where they just decide they're going to draw a line in the sand and say, when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center infrastructure and hybrid cloud and data security and connectivity in this particular geographic region for companies this size in these industries, gosh darn it, we are going to be the definitive go-to experts. There's going to be no one that's going to have more of a presence in the early and the middle stages of the buyer's journey and the end stages of the buyer's journey than our company. And those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision with researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing. We are literally going to be the Wikipedia of data center infrastructure and hybrid cloud and data security and connectivity when it comes to our particular geographic region and these size companies and in these particular industries. And this isn't going to happen overnight. This is for sure a long-term play, but the stakes are ridiculously high because without this, your company, your sales team you're just going to keep hitting a brick wall. You're going to become driven into the ground, commoditized, marginalized, and there may be some cases where you have some really unique resources that nobody else can have on the planet because perhaps you have utility grid power right now that nobody else has. But other things being equal, it is a very different empowered buyer today than as recently as 10 years ago. And the sooner your company can wake up to that reality of showing up in the right places at the right time for the right people, and most of all in the right context, so that you're seeing the definitive go-to experts in your space, the easier it is to educate and build trust, earn attention, and stay with them throughout that full journey in a way that you dramatically influence how the whole decision committee evaluates the different alternatives that are in front of them. And make no mistake, if you are not present in the awareness and the consideration stages of the buyer's journey, your prospects and your clients are learning from someone. And that someone is going to be the one that shapes the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options that are in front of them. So the most important way to grow sales going forward when it comes to data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, and connectivity is to make it imperative, to make it super high front burner priority for your client-facing team to be the go-to experts, to be the teachers, the trusted advisors, the consultants, and the thought leaders that are the ones that are spending all of this time, as many of those 28 touch points as possible, so that there's no reason for your prospects and clients to want to go elsewhere for learning, for their professional development, for evaluating. And you'll know this is starting to work because you'll start to see some leading indicators in your data. You'll start to see, like, for example, you put out an ebook or you put out a webinar event registration, and you look down and you see your registration notices and you see 4, 5, 6 people from the exact same company just registered within an hour or two of each other. Probably not coincidental. They're actually following your cue. You told them, like, who else should be at this, who else should be reading this, and they forwarded it around, and it's awesome. The decision committee is learning together within the walled garden of your resources, within the walled garden of your breakfast seminar, your lunch and learn, your webinar series, educational webinar series, whatever it is. Second leading indicator that this is working is not only are they consuming your educational resources, your podcasts, your blogs, your live streams, your webinars, attending all your events and your tours and everything like that. Not only are you seeing strong signs of interest there, you get to the first meeting when they're finally at the decision stage and you go in and you meet with them and they're quoting you. Hey, Joshua, on page 17 of your ebook on what every mid-market manufacturing CTO needs to know about SOC compliance, you mentioned these 3 areas. Well, this is when you start to realize, holy smokes, they're reading our stuff. They're not only reading our stuff, they're using our resources as the methodology for planning this whole initiative. Do you think that's going to knock out some of, for sure you're on the short list, but in many cases, your educational experience, the resources that you brought to the table for them have neutralized all of the other competitors. So by the time they're getting to the decision stage, price competition is gone. You're the last person standing. You're the last team standing. Maybe you and one others perhaps, but you've used this as an enormous, enormous competitive advantage to shape the criteria. And by the way, the flip side of this is, because your prospects and clients are studying the heck out of your educational resources, you better make sure that your internal team members are also up to speed and trained and know your internal resources cold. because the last thing in the world you want to see is your account executive go in and one of your prospects is quoting page 17 of your SOC compliance ebook, and your account executive is like, what ebook? We have an ebook on SOC compliance? Like, so yeah, this is why this is a company culture mandate. So when it comes to growing sales of data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, and data security and connectivity, it's critical to recognize how much of the buyer's journey has changed. It's crucial to recognize that they now want a self-propelled buyer's journey. And your golden ticket in to earn attention on their side of the table throughout the awareness and the consideration stage is reframing, repositioning your client-facing team so they can show up early and often. Both of those are super important. You can't just show up early. You got to show up early and often in the context of being seen as teachers, consultants, trusted advisors, and subject matter experts. That's how you grow sales of data center infrastructure, hybrid cloud, data security, and connectivity in today's hyper competitive marketplace. Next question up. How do we manage business development for cloud migration, managed cloud services, and disaster recovery? How to manage business development for cloud migration, managed cloud services, and disaster recovery. So the first place I'd start is we need to figure out, are you selling commoditized versions of these products at a relatively low price point to small and medium-sized businesses, or are we selling to the mid-market and enterprise? Because when you mention cloud migration, that's a professional service. In most cases, that would be high margin, considered sales process, great unit economics. Managed cloud services, probably somewhere in the middle between a commoditized service and like full-blown professional customers, full-blown professional services and disaster recovery. Again, it could be all over the map, but I think what's super important to first figure out is from a product management roadmap differentiation point of view, are we talking about skewed services that are purchased almost like e-commerce on your website? Are we talking about services around cloud migration, managed cloud, and disaster recovery, where for sure it's a considered sales process? It's a high ticket purchase. It's probably a 5, 6, it could be even a 7-figure per enterprise purchase. But again, it really comes down to who you're targeting. Is this small and medium-sized business? Is this channel partners of small and medium-sized business? Is it legitimately mid-market, meaning at least 500 employees on up? Or is it legitimately enterprise, like thousands of employees and selling at a very different price point? So when you think about things like unit economics, understanding your lifetime client value, your LCV, your client acquisition costs, your CAC, your average sales cycle length, these all play large in how you decide to staff up your business development playbook around this in terms of marketing, potentially sales development reps, SDRs, AEs, account executives, potentially account managers for post-purchase. And generally, the larger the client that you're selling to, the more sophisticated and the more finely nuanced, the more highly trained your whole go-to-market, your whole business development motion needs to be. And the lower price point that you're selling at, the more self-service, the more self-onboarding most of these services need to be. So we're going to focus primarily in this question on somewhere in the middle, like mid-market, really large small businesses, at least the lower end of mid-market, which probably would define it somewhere around a few hundred employees, maybe up to 1,000 employees. And at that size, when it comes to managing business development, we need some guardrails. So first, get your ICP, your ideal client profile, in good shape so you know exactly what countries, what parts of those countries, what continents, the geographic part of where you can successfully sell these cloud migration, managed cloud services, and disaster recovery into. Can you really truly market, sell, and service globally? Or are you better suited to service in a particular region of the world, on a particular continent, in a particular country? So that's important to know. Second, size. We just talked about why size has such a huge impact on how to approach business development and product development when it comes to all three of these categories: cloud migration, managed cloud, and DR, disaster recovery. And then there's the post-service part of that, how well suited you are to provide the kind of services that they're going to expect on a regular basis. And all of this, when it comes to your ideal client profile, also requires some care around the industry that your target accounts are in, that your ideal clients are in, because when it comes to highly regulated industries, either you're able to successfully meet the compliance requirements for these highly regulated industries or you're not. And in some cases, the compliance requirements are unique to particular geographic regions. That's why I always encourage people to think about geography, company size, and industry before you get too far. And then from there, you can build out your target account list, the couple dozen, couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand companies that you ideally want to be able to market and sell to. And then within those accounts, who are the most important stakeholders that you need to educate and build trust around what's top of mind for each of those, their biggest goals and challenges when it comes to anything and everything having to do with cloud migration, managed cloud, and disaster recovery. Because we know, like, if you're selling to a CTO, they're going to likely care about different issues than a CFO. And a CFO is going to care about different issues than a ESG person or a compliance manager or a director of network engineering or a CISO, a cybersecurity person. Each will care about slightly different issues. So it's not so much that you need to build out 5, 6, 7 different buyer personas. What's most important is for the nature of your business model and where you've had success is to look at your testimonials, your case studies, your closed deals that are sitting in your CRM and see what they have in common, both at the account level and the individual stakeholders that are involved. And the most influential stakeholders are involved in your sales process where you've had the most success. You'll want to prioritize your most important kind of stakeholder that you're targeting will be designated your primary buyer persona. The second most will be your secondary buyer persona. And really complex enterprise sales, there may be 3 different buyer personas that you target, a tertiary buyer persona. There may also be somebody that if they show up, they're going to completely derail your sales process. We'll call that a negative buyer persona. We're trying to stay away from that person because it's the kiss of death to you moving forward successfully with that kind of client. But all of those things come into account when it comes to managing business development, understanding what's going on at the account level, understanding what's going on at the individual stakeholder level, and then figuring out a way for you to add as much value as possible throughout the full buyer's journey for those really important stakeholders. So understanding what their biggest goals and challenges are and providing phenomenal educational resources and events experience so that they want to spend time with members of your team throughout their research, comparing options and decision-making process. So that if you think about like 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, what can you do to set the stage so they spend as many of those 28 touch points as possible with a member of your team? Because when they do that, not only are you starving oxygen away from competitive forces, but they're falling in love with your resources. And by extension, they're falling in love with your brand and falling in love with your company, which nearly guarantees that you stay on the short list. In some cases, the experience is so over the top, incredibly valuable, that by the time they get to the decision stage, there's no short list anymore. Your company is the short list. In other words, you won because they spent so much time with your team members already that they can't see going in any other possible direction than your company. And this is something that was a nice to have like 10 years ago, but in today's self-propelled buyer's journey, where like 83% of a typical journey is over before sales contact now or before vendor contact, it's become indispensable. 10 years ago, you could get away with a more traditional business development playbook because back then your buyers would typically spend about 50%, 56% was the number at the time of their buyer's journey with someone from your sales team. Now it's like 83%. So even in the best kind of scenario, you're only in there like 17%. That's the best it's going to get. And the only way that you're going to break out of that sales allergy and get to spend more time with your prospects and clients is to show up in a way that they want you to show up. They're learning. They're figuring out how to get things done in their company to achieve their business goals, their technology goals, to deal with their biggest challenges, their biggest stressors, but they're not actively seeking vendors till they're nearly at the end. And they're certainly not open to having vendor conversations until they're at the end. And the way you're going to circumvent that, the way you're going to work around it, is to think about repositioning and repackaging most of your client-facing team to now show up as consultants, and consulting that's so valuable that it feels like they're dealing with a big four firm. So the level of consultative sales that your SDRs, your sales development reps, and your account executives, your AEs are able to provide, that it feels so good that it feels like they're speaking with someone from KPMG or EY or PwC or Deloitte or something in that context. And your account managers post-purchase, your customer success managers, should be so next level that it feels like they're talking with like the MBA version, the Masters in Business Administration version, or like the PhD level version of the Big Four consultant. That's how intensely, insanely valuable those interactions need to be from the standpoint of your prospects and clients. So they want to spend lots of time with members of your client-facing team. So going forward, that's how most companies should be managing business development when it comes to cloud migration, managed cloud services, and disaster recovery. Next question up. How does a data center operator improve their messaging? How can a data center operator improve their messaging? Fantastic question. Because by default, when I look at messaging for a lot of data center operators, there's a lot of very selfish, one-sided messaging going on, a lot of messaging malpractice, if we want to call it that. And the problem with messaging malpractice is it falls completely flat. Nobody wants to read it. Nobody wants to interact with it because it lacks empathy. You're not walking a mile or a kilometer in their shoes. There's nothing coming through that shows that you truly understand what they're trying to achieve professionally, what their team is trying to get done, what their company is trying to get done, and what they're struggling with. And it's only when you get that extreme empathy and extreme clarity and understanding about what your prospects and clients are going through and how your company might be able to help them. It's only when you've achieved that you're able to document buyer personas and you're able to get the language down in their own words of what your messaging needs to look like to resonate. I also think it's incredibly important to recognize that it's now a self-propelled buyer's journey. Most buyers of data center related services have gotten severely allergic to spending time with members of your sales team during most of the buyer's journey. It wasn't always this hard. It used to be 10 years ago that prospects for data center operators selling infrastructure, your prospects would typically spend about half of the buyer's journey with members of your sales team. Now they're spending a very small percentage, like maybe 17% of the buyer's journey with members of your sales team. So you and your client-facing team need to work a lot harder to show up early and often. And in many cases, your messaging is taking the place of what used to happen in face-to-face conversations. Go back and repeat that because it's a huge, huge unlock with all of this. So 10 years ago, if you were an SDR, a sales development rep, or an account executive for a data center operator selling like colocation or hyperscale or something like that, your sales team members would typically get to spend about half of the buyer's journey, half of the sales cycle with their best prospects and clients. And because of that, even if your messaging was only mediocre, you could typically get away with it because the humans that were involved in this on a one-on-one basis could self-correct and adjust along the way. Now we've gotten to the point with an additional 10 years of digital transformation, millions of people working from home in the first couple years of this particular decade, a lot of baby boomers retiring, and more Gen Zs and millennials in decision-making roles. Now we're to this point where the self-driven buyer's journey is the predominant buyer's journey. And what used to happen in face-to-face one-on-one conversations now happens through messaging. And it's text messaging, it's reading, it's image-based, it's graphical kind of messages, it's video messages in all ways, shapes, or forms, live video, on-demand video, long-form video, medium-length form video, short-form video. All of this is messaging. And so much of the messaging now happens as a substitute for what used to happen face-to-face. And no matter how hard your client-facing team members want to try to rig up the DeLorean and the flux capacitor from Back to the Future and head back to a time when it was easier to get in front of prospects and clients. Time has marched on. We need to accept the present day reality and understand that the messaging, text, image, video is incredibly important. And the way we nail relevance is we get super clear about our ideal client profile. We get crystal clear about who the buyer personas are that matter the most in our full buyer's journey. We understand that there's a couple dozen steps in the buyer's journey between complete stranger and purchase decision. And we set about creating these fantastic educational resources and events experiences so that we earn a seat at the table in as many of those 28 touch points as possible in awareness, consideration, and decision for our first and second most important kinds of buyer personas. And the better job we can do with that, the more we can frame the criteria that our most important accounts, our most important stakeholders at these accounts use to evaluate all of the different competitive alternatives. And by definition, in order to get invited in on their side of the table, it's now for sure a buyer's driven, as opposed a buyer centric buyer's journey. More than ever. In order to do that and have the opportunity to get invited in, the messaging has to have extreme empathy and extreme specificity for who they are, what they're trying to figure out, what's driving them nuts, and how our company can potentially be a solution to that before they even know that our company exists. That's by definition the awareness and the consideration stage. They're not looking for our company. They're not looking for our competitors. They're not even looking for our category yet in the really early stages. They just know that there's a big goal they're trying to figure out. They know there's a big challenge that's driving them nuts, and they need to get on the path to getting these addressed. And the better job you can do with showing up in the right places at the right time for the right people, and most of all for the right reasons and the right context, so that they see you and your team members as teachers, consultants, experts, trusted advisors, the better job you're going to do with improving your messaging and earning your way in to be highly relevant to their full buyer's journey. So when they get to the decision stage, you've already heavily indoctrinated those prospects and clients into your way of how you would approach this. They're totally bought into your company's methodology. They've actually used the methodology that they've learned from your team members to spread throughout their company, throughout the full decision-making committee. And you'll know this is working because when you go in to meet with them for the first time, face-to-face or virtually, they're literally quoting your methodology that they've adopted for how they're getting alignment, how their internal champions are getting alignment for this kind of initiative for outsourcing to a data center operator. So when it comes to how a data center operator can improve their messaging, get really, really crisp and clear about who the ideal client is, and get really, really tight about prioritizing the most important and second most important buyer persona. Really do your homework, do your research to understand in their own words what is top of mind, and make sure that your messaging uses those exact words, regardless of whether we're talking about things that are in text, like blog posts, articles, ebooks, downloadable planning guides, things that are in images, like carousels and infographics and things like that, or in video content. And video content could be live events, it could be webinars, it could be live streams, it could be on demand, it could be long form video, medium length video, short form video, all of the above. But in order to improve messaging, it starts with understanding who they are, what they care about, and the words that they use to articulate their biggest goals and challenges. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com. Hey there, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you are watching our weekly Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, where each week I answer a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. Next question up for this week is, how do we generate new IT infrastructure leads for colocation, connectivity, and disaster recovery? How do we generate new IT infrastructure leads for colocation, connectivity, and disaster recovery? So what it sounds like is your company has 3 different lines of business. In other words, when I look at your website, I likely see 3 boxes. I likely see 3 choices, 3 submenu choices under your navigation for what we do or services or something like that. So you provide colocation, you provide connectivity, like leading into telecommunications, and disaster recovery, which almost certainly in this context means I hope you have multiple locations, because at this stage of the game in today's hyper competitive data center marketplace, it's hard to imagine a scenario where you're going to be able to sell colocation, connectivity, and disaster recovery at a decent price point if you can't offer multi-location replication as part of the big picture solution. So how do we generate new IT infrastructure leads for this? Well, we need to have a really good understanding as to who we have done best with in the past. What kinds of clients historically have we sold to that have been happy with what they've been ecstatic, that have become great promoters of our colocation, connectivity, and disaster recovery services. So look at your case studies, your testimonials, your reviews, look in your CRM and see what do these accounts, what do these clients have in common? Where are they located? What size companies are they from in terms of number of employees? What industries are they from? And hopefully you start to see some consensus on that, because that consensus is going to be really important to documenting an ideal client profile to give you a lot more clarity on your lead generation. If they're all over the place, then the next question typically is which ones are strategic to your company? Which ones are the most profitable? This is where you may need to loop in your finance leader to figure out which of these clients have the best margins, which have the highest lifetime value, the lowest cost of client acquisition, the shortest average sales cycle, and in general, from a financial standpoint, the ones that your CFO would love to 10x. So for generating those leads, we need to understand what kinds of companies we're looking for. Where I see a lot of co-location companies, especially smaller ones, struggle around lead generation is many times you almost need a hyper-local playbook, and then you need a global or a national playbook. What does that mean? Well, there's certain kinds of clients that you're going to sell co-location, connectivity, and disaster recovery to that are going to pick a relatively small co-location provider because they've picked one of the huge companies in the past and they didn't have a great experience. So now they decide to go to the other extreme. They want to go to a company that's so small that when they come out to get a data center tour, it's not necessarily the CEO or the owner that's doing the data center tour, but the person doing the data center tour introduces everyone to that person as part of the educational event. So you love the idea of having access to a CEO owner, which by definition in most cases means it's a relatively small company. In some cases with that kind of footprint, it ends up being a single location. But as I just mentioned a few moments ago, there's a lot to be said that if you're serious about co-location and connectivity and disaster recovery, DR, that you would at least have a second, possibly a third location that's outside of your immediate geographic area. So that's the really small operator. If you get to the point that you have 5 or 10 locations, get to being like more of a mid-size operator beyond 10 plus locations, you start to be either national or potentially a global provider of co-location. And depending on the nature of your target market, you may have, again, 2 different playbooks. Even the largest data center operators frequently have 2 different playbooks going on, where the account executives that have their office physically in one of the facilities, they tend to do a lot of local events. They're like hosting lunch and learns, they're hosting tours, they're sponsoring local golf tournaments, they're going to every technology related event in the area and either trying to speak or having a booth, having a table. They're doing tons of hyper local kinds of sponsorship and community involvement. That's a very different kind of playbook than recognizing that in addition to prospects and clients that can drive to your facility, that are probably within a 30 to 60-minute drive, there may also be a significant amount of leads and opportunities with companies that are anywhere from hundreds to thousands of miles, hundreds or thousands of kilometers away from your facility. And they're specifically targeting your geographic region because they need a presence in your geographic region for like edge reasons, for latency sensitive applications where they need to have a physical presence, some cases for governance reasons, but they're not in your local area. They can't drive there in a half hour to an hour. But they specifically are looking for a provider in your local area. And that kind of playbook is going to lean very heavily on search engine optimization, search engine marketing, social media marketing, targeted outbound, potentially targeted ads, using like webinars and live streams to educate and build trust long distance, doing virtual tours to move things along in the buyer's journey. And some of those clients may actually sign up for well-defined services and may not ever even end up touring your facility, but it's a very different kind of playbook compared to hyper local, where you're focused on like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we have 300 clients on our target account list? Wouldn't it be awesome if we could get like 25-50% of them to come to a local event sometime in the next 12 months in our facility? So we're educating and building trust with those folks in a way that really moves the needle and accelerates the sales process for lead generation and sales cycle acceleration. So I think those are really the two big considerations: is, are you running a hyper local sales and marketing motion? Are you running a potentially national or global motion? And even if you're doing both, there's a really good chance that the personas are really, really similar. In other words, like, let's say you're hosting a breakfast seminar series, and over the course of the next 12 months, you're going to have 12 of these events in your training classroom or in your conference room. And the goal is to have 15, 20 people attend each of them that perfectly align with your ideal clients. And in a perfect world, 2 or 3 people are in the room that are clients that absolutely adore working with your company, and 16 or 18 of them are potential clients. So actually the existing clients can help sing your praises and become an extension of your sales force. The content that you would create, the deck that you would create to present at a like educational breakfast seminar or lunch and learner symposia, is largely the same kind of deck that you can use presenting on a webinar or presenting on a live stream. So there's a lot of cross-pollination between the two. If you're hosting live events like that, for sure, bring in a videographer, record it, because you, in the same way you'd repurpose a webinar recording, repurposing an in-person event can be pretty cool. Being able for people that are interested in being on camera to talk about takeaways from what they learned from the event, that can be just as cool or even cooler. That gives you great social media content. But be really, really deliberate about your ideal client profile at a company level, where you think you can win the best, and be super specific about the kinds of people, the kinds of stakeholders in those kinds of companies where you really need to build relationships and educate and build trust. Another thing that I'll just put out there for generating IT infrastructure leads for colo connectivity and disaster recovery is a lot of colocation operators do really well with channel partners. And in some cases, these are like master agents. In a lot of cases, it's more grassroots, like managed service providers that have deep presence in the local community and bring their own book of business with them. The challenge when you're working with any kind of channel partner, especially managed service provider, is it's very likely that they have 10 or 20 different relationships like that with other companies like yours. So you really have to work hard to earn your way onto their calendar to get them to constantly stay top of mind. It's a longer game. In other words, like if you hire an account executive, that account executive is working for you 100% of the time, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. If you have a channel partner who's getting paid on a commission basis for what they bring in, they're not working for you 40, 50, 60 hours a week. They're not working for you 100% of the time. You're lucky if you get 5% of their attention in any given month, any given quarter. And the same thing on the services side, where channel partners often have strong motivation to partner with a company like yours who provides colo connectivity and disaster recovery, is they're asked to be a resource on anything and everything having to do with IT. And for the most part, most of their IT clients will need one or more of those services, either connectivity, colocation, or disaster recovery. Actually, the way I originally got into this space 10 years ago is I'd been working with computer consulting firms and value-added resellers and managed service providers on marketing, sales, project management, recurring revenue kinds of strategies. And I saw for a lot of those companies, as the world was moving from premise-based to client-server, premise-based and client-server over to public cloud and SaaS, a lot of them were struggling to figure out what their business models were going to look like going forward. But the ones that did figure it out were going in one of three directions. Some of them that were leaning more towards like line of business applications that came from like an accounting background. They moved up to mid-market and they got involved in ERP, enterprise resource planning, or something very similar to that. Another third of those kinds of managed service providers moved into building web apps and mobile apps, like custom software development firms. And another third got heavily involved in infrastructure, meaning they would take a server or servers, put them in a colocation facility, and rent out slices of those servers to their existing outsourced fractional CTO kinds of clients. Or in some cases, one of the really forward-thinking clients would come back from an industry conference, like a hospitality conference or healthcare conference or government conference, and they'd say, Joshua, I have no idea what this means, but we attended this fantastic future of our industry session, and they said we need to co-locate a server. You're our fractional outsourced CTO. You figure out what that means. Tell us what it's going to cost. But yeah, we want you to do that. We want you to provision it, manage that as an extension of what you already do for our company's outsourced IT solution. So yeah, that's originally how I got into this space. And then eventually I learned about the rest of the ecosystem and commissioning and decommissioning and facilities and construction and real estate. But yeah, the point with all of this is when it comes to a company that wants to do lead gen, improve its lead generation for colo connectivity and disaster recovery, you're going to have direct clients. That may be 80% of your lead gen, but you may also want to reserve 20% of your lead generation efforts to focus on recruiting, building relationships with channel partners. That can take a while. It definitely can be a longer, but it also they can stay with you for literally years and end up bringing in multiple clients every year going forward for several years in a row as an extension of your company. So that's how I would approach generating new IT infrastructure leads for colocation, connectivity, and disaster recovery. Next question up is, how do we connect with data center architects and engineers for pre-engineered metal building systems? How do we connect with data center architects and data center engineers for pre-engineered metal building systems? So, wow, this is a hyper-specific question. So this company is basically in construction. They do something related to data center construction, specifically providing pre-engineered metal buildings for companies that are building data centers that are about to commission brand new data centers. So they're looking to build relationships with data center architects and data center engineers. So the way I would approach that is, first, let's define at an account level, at a company level, where these engineers and architects do business. Because when it comes to both architects and engineering, they're almost certainly licensed and regulated by some kind of governing body. And that means, by definition, it's unlikely that you're going to have an architect and an engineer of a tiny firm that's going to do business all over the planet. They're most likely, their practices are local. And if it's national or global, it's a much larger firm. But so to build relationships with these architects and engineers, let's first zero in on where they're located. Are they located just in a particular metro area? Are they located throughout? Do they do business throughout an entire country or throughout an entire continent? But let's get clarity first on where these architects and engineers are located that you want to build relationships with. Second, what size companies are they from? In other words, the architects and engineers, depending on the size of their company, probably also tells you quite a bit about the size of the clients they work with. If you are like a huge global data center operator like CyrusOne or Digital Realty or Equinix or something like that, the architects and the engineers, if you outsource any of that at all, are probably going to be from huge companies, right? So that's going to take you in a certain direction. If you want to work with architects and engineers who are more involved with mid-sized operators or enterprise data center kind of projects, and then there could be some data center architects and engineers that are either solo practice or relatively small practice. So let's get specific on where you think you're going to be most successful based on the kinds of clients that they're most likely to be working with. And It doesn't always hold true, but especially with a lot of professional services companies like architects and engineers, it's quite common to find that their company size is a good fit for other kinds of company sizes. In other words, smaller professional services firms tend to do better with smaller or mid-sized clients, and much larger, like professional services firms with hundreds of employees or thousands of employees, they tend to stick with larger data center operators, larger enterprise data center buyers. So getting specific on the company size that these architects and engineers work with, I think will serve you well. And then in addition to all of that, are there certain industries that they tend to specialize in? And you'll know that this is an issue because when you go to the websites for these architects and engineering firms, on their homepage and on their who we work with kind of pages, you'll see certain specializations that they have. Industrial is usually industrial real estate, industrial construction is usually the major category, but there can be subcategories even within there. So to connect with them, we're going to define at account level their where they're located, their company sizes, and any specializations they have. From there, we should be able to build a target account list of the ideal architecture firms and engineering firms that we want to build relationships with. And then we need a buyer persona researched and built out, analyzed and built out for each of these stakeholders that we need to build relationships with, for that are going to be super interested at some point in learning more about our pre-engineered metal building systems. But early on, it needs to be all about them. What is top of mind for a data center architect? What is top of mind for a data center engineer? What are their biggest goals? What's the consensus on that? That when you interview several of them, you start to see pattern recognition. So we need to document in their own words. And the same thing with both the architects and the engineers. And from there, we should be able to build an educational content strategy, an educational event strategy, where we are providing enough value that they actually want to spend time with members of your client-facing team, because we're able to help them do their job better. We're able to serve as a resource. We're able to be seen as a teacher, a consultant, a trusted advisor, and a subject matter expert. Now, if you don't currently have subject matter experts internally within your company that builds pre-engineered metal building systems, then your goal is to get with the people within your company who know the space reasonably well, who have worked with architects and engineers, and set about being able to be a curator of great expertise around that. So this is where starting like an interview-based podcast, having lunch and learn panels, having webinar panels where you bring in multiple external experts, and then you're serving more as a media company interviewer, facilitator, moderator of multiple experts from the space that would add a lot of value that data center architects could learn from, data center engineers could learn from. But that's a huge, huge unlock for having strong presence in the early and the middle stages of the journey today, when so many people in the data center ecosystem, including architects and engineers, really don't want to spend a lot of time with salespeople anymore. But they always need to be learning. They always need to be keeping their skills sharp. So if you're able to show up as a trusted advisor, a consultant, a subject matter expert, a teacher, or perhaps even a thought leader, then that starts to grab them by the virtual shirt collar in their feed and pulls them in, and they see it as worthy of their attention, because you've you've brought these resources to bear that helps them do their job better, that helps their team achieve their goals, that helps their team power through something that they're currently struggling with, that's stressing them out. So in order to connect with them, we need to understand what's top of mind for them. We need to understand where they hang out online and offline. And then we need to figure out a way to be able to trade enough value, that we're able to provide enough educational value that they actually want to spend time with members of your client-facing team in this kind of context. That's the best way to connect with them. Because if you keep connecting with data center architects and engineers the same way you would have 10 years ago, you're probably not getting in early enough to have a meaningful impact on how they evaluate and compare the different options that are in front of them. And this is the mistake that a lot of account executives and sales development reps are making in this space, is they really haven't adjusted their playbook in recent years, even though the market has completely changed, even though most of the stakeholders now prefer a self-driven buyer's journey. So a lot of the education and trust building that used to happen face-to-face is now happening more in a self-guided motion. It's happening because they're reading blog posts and articles, downloading ebooks, watching videos, listening podcasts, attending webinars, interacting and learning from people on LinkedIn. These are all huge, huge things that were kind of sort of around 10 years ago, but they're now the predominant way that data center architects and engineers would learn from a company like yours going forward. So the question is, has your company's leadership caught up to this reality? And are you making it imperative for data center architects and engineers to see your company as the be-all end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with pre-engineered metal building systems? Or are you selling the same way you have for decades without really adjusting to this new reality? And we're in this new reality because as more and more digitally resistant people retire and more Gen Z and more millennials are in these decision-making roles and Gen X are getting elevated into these roles, it's the digital buyer's journey has become the predominant buyer's journey. The interesting part, I'm Gen X, and everyone that I know that's 10 or 15 years older than me that still actively works in the data center industry, like baby boomers, they all attend webinars, they all watch videos, they all listen to podcasts. So I don't know who this metaphorical person is that people think still exists that's that digitally resistant. So if you're serious about connecting with data center architects and engineers, in order to do this the right way, you need to be showing up more like consultants and trusted advisors and less like a vendor. And the way you ultimately figure out what will help you deliver value to them is getting really specific about who these companies are and who these stakeholders are within these companies that you want to educate and build trust with. And the sooner you wake up to this reality and bake this into your go-to-market strategy and your marketing and sales strategy going forward, the better off you're going to make it on yourself. The more you resist this, the more likely it is that there's other companies in your space that are getting in early, that are the ones that are educating and building trust with the prospects and clients that you need to be building relationships with going forwards. This is very much a mindset, cultural kind of change that almost certainly needs to start from the top down. If you're from a relatively small company with a couple dozen or even a couple hundred employees, this literally needs to come down from like your CEO or your chief commercial officer, chief revenue officer, chief marketing officer, someone like that needs to be your internal champion. If you're from a company with thousands of employees, yeah, it probably won't go all the way to CEO level. But again, this is a mindset change. This is a big transition. This is a big shift and how client-facing team members need to be seen. And it requires quite a bit of upskilling internally as well for your team members to be able to successfully pull this off, to be seen by architects and engineers as someone or someones that's able to deliver this much value that your prospects and clients actually want to spend a lot of time with members of your client-facing team, as opposed to it being the other way around of chasing and constantly nagging them to try to get time on their calendars. So going forward, that's how a company that makes pre-engineered metal building systems can connect with data center architects and data center engineers. And that brings us to our final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. By the way, if you're getting great value from this live show, make sure that you hit the like button and feel free to add in the comments about a topic or question that you'd like to see us address in an upcoming Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show episode. So the final question for this week is, how do we compete with data center real estate brokers? How do we compete with data center real estate brokers? So this more than likely is from the perspective of someone that actually is a data center real estate broker that's competing with other data center real estate brokers. And what's interesting is among the data center ecosystem, when you look at operators, technology companies, facilities companies, construction and real estate companies, the construction and real estate parts of it, especially the real estate parts, have in many cases lagged a little bit in catching up to the self-driven buyer's journey. And it's really strange because the stakeholders that they're trying to build a relationship with have already shown very strong signs of moving towards this self-driven journey, regardless of whether you're talking to a development executive or a construction manager or someone from a private equity firm, they're all showing very, very strong signs of navigating journeys today very differently than they did as recently as 10 years ago. They're all reading blogs and email newsletters, and they're super active on LinkedIn, and they watch videos and they attend webinars and they ask questions on LinkedIn among their peers. And most of this existed 10 years ago. It's just that now we've started to see this self-driven journey take a lot of oxygen away from a very traditional interruption-focused sales and marketing playbook. Granted, there are, in the DCRE and data center real estate, there are for sure some of the large companies that do a fantastic job with publishing great research reports and holding great educational events and webinars. But especially in the smaller companies that are resource constrained, there seems to be a very, very quick drop off on digital adoption, on thought leadership, on positioning more as consultants and subject matter experts, mostly because they likely believe that that they have something that's so unique and so special that their prospects and clients will engage with them no matter what. It doesn't really position them to be very competitive. And I think what, in many cases in the DCRE space, they're overlooking is that the topics they want to talk about are often not just talked about in data center real estate context. They're talked about throughout the full data center ecosystem. So when you look at like a competitive analysis for a data center real estate firm, they may be looking primarily at their direct competitors that they know of. So like CBRE, JLL, Colliers, 5-10 huge global firms in this particular case. And then in smaller markets, there's more mid-sized companies. And then in localized markets, there's hyper localized small firms. They're looking at their direct competitors, the ones that can be a real thorn in their side, sometimes the ones that they cooperate with. They're probably not considering their indirect competitors very much. Those are the ones that don't have a strong presence in their geographic market. And for sure, they're almost certainly overlooking non-business model competitors. What are non-business model competitors? These are other companies, other entities that create content about a topic that's of strong interest to your most important buyers, but don't do anything having to do with data center real estate. So in other words, like when a media company or an events company puts out a fantastic research report or has a fantastic in-person event or virtual event about your topic, they're not a thorn in your side for direct competition, but they're a real thorn in your side for getting the attention of the prospects and clients that you want to have the attention of. Because at the end of the day, there's only so many things that can surface on page one of a search results page or on top of results for when someone asks a question to ChatGPT or Copilot or Perplexity or Claude or Gemini or any one of these large language model kind of query tools that are on their way to somewhat taking a dent in traditional search engine optimization, traditional search engine results pages. And same basic issue with YouTube. Someone goes to YouTube and they tell me about the state of the data center real estate market in Chicago or London or Sydney or Dubai, whatever it is. And there's only so many videos that can show up above the fold that are going to actually get significant amounts of watch time. And same thing going on LinkedIn, is especially with things where surfacing to the right buyers is a function of an algorithm. Now, you can get around some of that algorithm if you use traditional outbound prospecting. In other words, you have a target list of potential construction managers, potential data center developers, people at private equity firms, whoever your target audience is, whoever your ideal client is. So you can build a target account list. You can document your ideal client profile. You can hit a tool like LinkedIn Sales Navigator and do outbound prospecting. You can run ads for a lead generation offer through LinkedIn Campaign Manager and get really, really specific about the accounts, about the companies, about the people within those accounts that you want to capture the attention of. But what's super important to keep in mind with all of this is throughout the full data center ecosystem, and I think there actually are some data center or real estate professionals that think that they're immune to this, but they're not. Your buyers now are just doing a ton of research before they're willing to talk with you. Your prospects are just doing a ton of self-driven research on their own before they get to you, to the point where by the time they get to you, there's a lot of expertise that they've accumulated from consuming just tons of great content and events experiences online. And it used to be 10 years ago that you would spend like half of a buyer's journey. Like at the time, it was 56% of a buyer's journey before sales contact or vendor contact. Now it's like 83% of a typical buyer's journey is over before sales contact or vendor contact. So best case scenario, you're only in the room for like the last 17% of that research and decision-making process. And the only way you're going to earn your way back in is to now show up as the consultant, as the teacher, as a subject matter expert, as a trusted advisor, perhaps even as a thought leader about anything and everything having to do with data center real estate. By the nature of how most DCRE companies operate, the expertise is usually unique to a specific marketplace. But I would encourage you, if you don't yet have a strong presence on LinkedIn, if you don't have a strong blog, if you don't have a strong YouTube channel, if you don't have a strong podcast or webinar or educational event series, like now is the second best time to get started. The best time to get started was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But the more you kick this down the field, the harder it's going to be to compete, because this is the new competitive battleground. Your brand is no longer just, it used to be 10 years ago that a brand in this industry was controlled by a creative director, like your logos, your hexadecimal colors, your fonts, your brand guide. If you've ever gone to a small conference and you were in charge of like signage or something, you know firsthand just how much you can get caught in the weeds when it comes to making sure that your collateral and your signage and everything is aligned with brand. Fast forward 10 years ahead, and your brand is no longer just about those superficial aesthetic kind of decisions. Your brand is everything that the marketplace says about you when you're not in the room. And given that you and your company are really not in the room for very much of the buyer's journey anymore, your educational resources need to take the place of what used to happen in these one-on-one conversations. So these educational videos, these podcasts, these webinars, these articles, these buying guides, these infographics, these research reports are incredibly important. And these are significant investments, and it can take a while to see results from these investments. But I can tell you without a doubt, the companies that are knocking it out of the park, that are likely kicking your company's butt, if you're asleep at the wheel on this, are companies that have been investing aggressively in these kinds of initiatives for years. So again, the best time to get started is today. The second best time just to get started was, the longer you kick this down the field, the harder it's going to be to stay relevant going forward. Are we going to get to the point like what we've seen with residential real estate, where there's just going to be such a massive pushback and online marketplaces and everything? I think we're seeing the early signs of this already. There for sure are marketplaces that are relevant in the data center and the telecommunication industry that give us a window into the crystal ball of what the future may look like. So the question is, are you building up a strong enough professional brand to stay relevant going forward to the way that your most important prospects and clients are going to research and make decisions around anything and everything having to do with data center real estate? So I'd encourage you to just get closer to these prospects and clients and understand how they're learning, and figure out a way for you and your company, you and your team, to become part of that learning and education and trust building, because it really is incredibly important to staying competitive going forward. So that's how I would approach competing with data center real estate brokers. So that's the final question that we'll be addressing in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. I'm your host, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We're all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To make sure that you stay up to date on upcoming events and educational resources just like this, make sure you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter directly on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Until next week, I wish you great success in growing your impact, your team's impact, and your company's impact in the tremendous opportunities that are in front of us in the data center ecosystem. Take care now. The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.